Okay. Well, defining a threshold of quality for meta-analysis is not easy, but the inclusion of studies without follow-up is such a major drawback. We should also in our statements put that as an a priori condition. Because you cannot rely, not only diet, in 25 or 30 years, people change smoking, change everything. It's like doing the British doctor studies without follow-up. So in my view, those studies are not informative or misinformative. They should be excluded from the meta-analysis. That's it. Thanks.
Walter, that's for you.
Well, yeah, I guess that's. I think you're right. The confounders change as well, and there was one good example that we were involved with a couple of years ago, that looking at coffee and lung cancer, and there was a in the pooled analysis of the cohort studies, there was a positive association between coffee and lung cancer, and that made me a little bit scared because I could just see the headlines about that, and I was concerned. Most of the studies, basically all the studies in that analysis, even using our own data, had only the baseline measurement. And the people, but when we adjusted for coffee or for smoking during follow-up, basically the people who drank more coffee also were less likely to stop smoking during a follow-up. Probably there's addiction in common there. So not everybody drinks just coffee just because they're addicted. There's other reasons, but still the coffee drinkers are enriched with people who are subject to addiction. So when we adjusted for the confounder during the follow-up, it made that association go exactly back to null, which was, I think, really important because I think it would have been a black mark on epidemiology to have that association come out, that coffee was a likely cause of lung cancer. So many studies, cohort studies, most of them don't have repeated measurements, updated measurements of diet or the confounders during follow-up. But it is important. I think if we want good quality studies, we have to invest. A lot of it is because they didn't have funding to do it. And we do have to invest seriously if we're going to have good long-term data. I think that's the critical point. The other issue is, of course, following people is challenging. Sometimes, like there was one study in the U.S., they purposely included a lot of people with low income and low SES, which is, there's good reasons for doing that, but the dropout rates were horrendous. And so it's really, it's hard. Now, maybe, well, some of those people can be followed passively for major outcomes by registries, but the exposure doesn't get updated and the confounders don't get updated, which is serious. So there's not a simple answer to that, but again, it's like everything. If we were talking earlier about controlled feeding studies too, if we really want good data, we have to invest in doing that, and the same with observational studies as well. The biggest study in the U.S., the All of Us study, some of you may know, their initial budget was $10 billion, and they continue to pump more in it, and they haven't collected any dietary data yet, which is just I mean, how can you have a study that of health that doesn't have any dietary data? So it's that was, I think, more because they thought everything was genetics and not paying attention to diet. But anyway, I think, yes, good quality studies of all types are challenging and will take real resources. But you compare this to the budgets of drugs that are being evaluated, these are cheap studies.
I think it's important to note the importance, I think, of these robust methods with systematic reviews and meta-analyses. Jeff Livesey, I know, is listening, also looked at GI and GL, looking at truly validated, within a truly validated FFQs for carbohydrate, and found that you got much stronger association estimates and better significance when they had a correlation coefficient greater than 0.55. And we certainly will talk about this tomorrow. I've seen with the sweetener story with using where you have repeated measures, you see a different story, low calorie sweeteners than you do when you look at prevalent or baseline measures. I also wanted to just comment on the substitution analyses and what the WHO did with the saturated fat, because the original commission review that Russ D'Souza, colleague and friend, did and who trained at Harvard, didn't show the association with saturated fat, but called for substitution analyses. And it wasn't until 8 years later that the WHO updated with a substitution meta-analysis. It did show that if you substitute saturated fat or you replaced it with PUFA, MUFA, high quality carbohydrate, you actually saw reductions in events. So I think the importance of robust methods, I think, is really, really important here. Jenny.
Studies, congratulations. These are huge studies, and I know how hard they are to do, painfully hard. So my question relates to low carbohydrate diets in pregnancy. Did you see any signs that had poor outcomes for the child?
Poor, sorry?
Low carbohydrate.
Low carbohydrate diets in pregnancy, because there's a trend to do that, especially with women that have a diagnosis of gestational diabetes. So did you see any relationship between low carbohydrate diets and poor developmental outcomes?
Yeah.
You did?
Yes.
Okay.
So it was U-shaped more than...
Yes, yeah.
Okay. All right.
But also I have to say that the problem we have is that the range of glycemic index and glycemic load and also total carbohydrate intake is not, we do not have many extremes. So it's quite preserved. So it's difficult to find also differences, you know. So the total carbohydrate intake was within the recommendations.
Right. And did you have any women with gestational diabetes in your?
We had really few.
A few.
Really few. I think it was less than 2%. And we conduct a sensitive analysis also excluding them.
And can I ask one more question, please, John? I love your carbohydrate quality index, the Spanish one, because it seems to combine more than just glycemic index, more than just fiber, more than just sugar by itself. So what Walter and others think of adopting their carbohydrate quality index on a more global basis, not just Spanish studies?
Well, I think the carbohydrate quality index is a good index that can be useful also in other countries. The point is that, and this is what happened in two of the studies we analyzed, so in both in UK Biobank and also in the in the BEAST cohort, that food frequency questionnaires or 20-fold dietary records didn't collect fiber well. So this is why we couldn't analyze carbohydrate quality index. So in the end, these indices are collecting data from collecting nutritional data, but as Walter also indicated, metabolomics is there. And what I think is missing is to include biochemical variables into these indices.
Yes.
So trying to capture better what is metabolically happening, you know, because in the end, both food frequency questionnaires and 24 dietary records has limitations and do not capture perfectly what is happening at biological level.
Yes.
So I think this any of these indices should incorporate.
True, but in the end, it's the hard outcomes that matter, isn't it? And you seem to be getting those hard outcomes associated with your index.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think for this meeting, we talk a lot about carbohydrate quality. It's in our name, but we haven't synthesized all the measures of carbohydrate quality into a single index. And what the Spanish people have done seems like a good start. and we should talk about it sometime.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think there are good reasons to do that, to put the various components together in an index. I think it's also good to look at the components individually too. So there's reasons for doing both. And again, I sort of like the two-dimensional view of it.
True.
But each of those dimensions, we talked about in the last session, can be broken down, subdivided further. And that's good to be doing that as well. So yeah, we have another index that I think paper hasn't been accepted yet, but looking at what components would together make the highest prediction for some outcomes like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So it would be good to, I think, look at several indices and see maybe the one that's being used. And, well, there's several out there already. So having a critical look at several of those would be useful. But again, wanting to look in more detail at the components to understand the indices better at the same time.
Thank you.
Can I just add a quick comment about since we were talking about the carbohydrate quality in dementia. As I remember, you did one of your slides, and I look forward to seeing your paper, was it looked like that there was some increase in risk with, was it with, it seemed a little
In
bit
dementia, you mean?
counterintuitive, yes.
Yes.
Counterintuitive,
Yeah, low glycemic index was protecting,
right,
and high glycemic load was increasing the risk.
yeah, okay.
Marianne, I
Can-
think, and
yeah.
Josie.
I just want to make a wee point to Jenny, where I said about hairy definitions. I think we have to make very certain that whatever we use is very clearly defined both from a food perspective as well as from the physiological perspective, so we don't sort of go down one of those circles. So there's a lot of discussion to be had. Our next meeting, I think.
So Joseph, then David, then Laura is who I have right now for hands.
Just sorry, a brief
yes, of course.
point for Jenny. If you realize carbohydrate quality index results we got from about carbohydrate quality index were consistent with those from GL, and total carbohydrate rather than GI. So it makes sense. So in the end, if you are using different indices because there is any that is totally covering what is happening in the body, so there is any perfect indices. So if you look at using different indices, you get similar results or consistent results. So it makes you feel more comfortable with the, So, and in case of carbohydrate quality index, what is including is the fibers, sorry, I have to put the S at the end of fibers after the meeting today, but, maybe capture better.
Females, reproductive females as your reference group, not a male that weighs 70 kilograms, because the females that are reproducing are responsible for our next generation. And unless they get the nutrients they need and the right proportions, et cetera, then you have a whole generation affected, not just a small little subgroup of the population. And the guidelines that we give should be totally appropriate for that group. And they the default for the rest of the population, not an exception, because they're the most important.
But as far as I know, there are no specific recommendations for carbohydrates in pregnancy or in periconceptional nutrition.
Joseph.
Hi, a question for Walter. So very interesting presentation. I'm really interested in the substitution meta part of the work that you presented. I think very neat work. I have a question and some comments. So we've been working on this and thinking about this because of my interest in low calorie sweeteners and SSPs and their substitution. So my question is, I think in that substitution meta-analysis, There are studies which have an effect estimate from potatoes, and then there are studies which are from whole grains, and then you can I think subtract the estimates from each other, and then the major issue is the covariance, which I think because the major weight is from the Harvard cohorts, the covariance can be measured or estimated and used in the formula. My question is twofold. One is, are the study sets similar to each other? Because if the study sets are not similar, for example, the study set that contributes towards potato estimate are different from the one with whole grain, then we don't know if the difference that we see is because of the difference that actually exists or because of the difference in populations. So that's one issue. A way to counter that is to look at study pairs, or actually do a meta substitution at a study level and then combine it later. So did you consider that? Because in that, the only issue is that if a study only gives potato, not the whole grain, you can't include it. But I think there are solutions to that using multivariable meta-analysis. But this is something that you considered?
Right. The problem was that I think it was only our studies that really had both, and they gave the same results as the substitution meta-analysis, which was really somewhat reassuring. That way, ideally, you would do what you said, that you have pairs of studies, pairs of analysis from the same study. But there just weren't very many studies that had that apart from our own. So I think the covariance issue, it turns out not to be too much of an issue, especially when you have a meta-analysis. The confidence intervals are really tight anyway, and if you blow them up a little bit. But the covariance was really quite low, like 0.1 or something. And we did some sensitivity analyses putting that up, and it really made very little difference. And it's really the confidence intervals we're talking about there. So it should be done and checked, because there are other contrasts where the covariance might be higher, but for this, it doesn't seem to be too high.
Yeah, I think just to add a point, I think if you can verify, I'm sure you verified it, because when you verify the results in your own study, you can be pretty sure that your methodology is fine. It would work. So I think, especially, I think tomorrow I'll present this. So what one can do is look at the meta substitution in the studies that have the paired data, and those and they also have a substitution analysis also done, published, and then you can just compare if yours actually match that. So if that matches, then you're pretty sure that it works. And regarding covariance, it's not a big issue. You're right. Covariance will only change the confidence interval a bit, but not change the estimate itself. So actually, it's not a big issue. And usually, the covariance in these large cohorts, I don't know for what's the covariance for potato and whole grain. For locally sweetened, is like -0.2, so it's actually quite small.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, those are all good points. Even more fundamentally, it's become state of the art to do substitution analyses now. So that's the better way to do it. And then there are a couple of relationships, substitution analysis, meta-analyses of substitution analysis. So that would be better, actually. But the trouble is that most of the studies are from an era when people were not doing that. So that is the state of the art. And as John said, well, it's really, it's just so fundamentally important that we consider the alternative or the counterfactual, because just you can think of, if we're looking at, well, if everything in the diet is bad, then you won't find an effect of anything. Everything will be null. So fortunately, we are not in that extreme, and so you usually can do some substitution analyses. But in most studies, most of the sources of energy are not healthy. They're refined starches, sugar, and until recently, partially hydrogenated fats and a few other not so healthy things. So if you look at something like red meat or saturated fat, as John said, on its own, even if by default, you are comparing that with the rest of the sources of energy in the diet, and which are pretty bad. So saturated fat won't look so bad. When we do the substitution analysis, it's about like refined starch. And you could come up with lots of null associations when there really are some important benefits given different substitution alternatives like unsaturated fats.
David.
For Walter and Monica, do you see carbohydrate quality indices as being different for different diseases?
Almost very likely they would be, yes. Right. So
do you plan to do different carbohydrate quality indices? In other words, is there going to be one carbohydrate quality index, or are there going to be several carbohydrate quality indices specific for specific major diseases?
Well, I think if we were going to go down this route, we probably want to have one generalized index, which is one reason for looking at the components, especially for specific diseases, because we could miss something doing that. But it's like dietary patterns. We can't eat more than one dietary pattern. Americans like to eat more than one diet, but you can only have one diet, or should only have one diet. So and there may be some trade-offs for different outcomes. Like for alcohol, there seems to be some trade-offs.
I think with fibers, we do have to be specific for the disease.
Yeah, I think for understanding the relationships, we definitely then should. Yeah.
But since carbohydrate quality indices or other indices do not capture the difference between dietary fibers, so in the end, probably we can use the same for any disease. But I totally agree with you that we should maybe to profile a bit better what we consider is a carbohydrate quality index. But it happens the same with Mediterranean diet, for example. How many Mediterranean diets do we have? So a Mediterranean diet is a pattern, as Walter say, but within the same pattern, there are differences in food we eat and the way we eat and how we cook. So we have a general patterns, general ideas, general indices. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it may be depending on how we're using the index, that if it's for general advice for a generally healthy population, we're at risk for everything. Now, if you have a specific condition, then you may want to have something more specific, either a risk factor, you have metabolic syndrome maybe, or you've developed a high-risk mammographic pattern, you may want to potentially have some different diet or dietary pattern. Or if you've got already diabetes or breast cancer, you may want to have a specific dietary pattern for that or index.
Yeah, but I really believe that if we want to go in deep on that, we need to add to these indices, we need to add biochemical or molecular markers, because in the end, it's not only the type of fibers, it's how these fibers are processed or not by our microbiota, how our microbiota is changing during the day or across the weeks, and also whether epitranscriptomics play a game, play a role there. So it's being more complicated. So probably it's like inflammatory indices, dietary inflammatory indices that somehow add some biochemical markers. I'm not so fan of these indices, so I think also have many limitations, but probably in order to cover what you say, what you suggest, we should add other variables, other parameters that goes beyond what we can capture from nutritional records.
So one last question before lunch. Laura had a question, and I'll make this the last question.
Thank you. Monica, really interesting results, and in an area that I think, as Jenny's saying, is actually really important for us to be understanding a little bit more. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm trying to remember all the numbers, but is the BMI of the women generally about 23? So they're fairly what we would consider a normal body weight. And then the glycemic index threshold is around 54. So you're seeing a reduction up to 54, and then it kind of plateaus, which is a fairly low GI. So And then in context with the carbohydrates that you're seeing, so the results that you're seeing in glycemic load. So what would be the change in guidelines or the public messaging? And then would we potentially see something different if we looked at a population of women that are maybe a slightly higher BMI?
This is like, well, not a preliminary study, but I mean, it's quite new in the field because there is nothing published on quality of carbohydrates or even amount of carbohydrates in pregnancy and the impact on neurodevelopment. So this is what we had as well. Body mass index was auto-reported because what could be really nice is to have those women who plan to be pregnant. So evaluate them before the pregnancy, not during the pregnancy, because during the pregnancy, everything has already changed. Even in the case of ECLIPSE score, the second cohort, that we evaluate early and late pregnancy, but early pregnancy is after 12 weeks, of pregnancy. So most of them already knew that were pregnant, so they change their nutritional behaviors. They tried to, let's see if they did it, but they tried at least to eat more healthy. So for me, the recommendation, so for me, what it's important, or at least I think it's important from these studies, is that pointed out the relevance of taking care about carbohydrate quantity and quality during a specific period of our life, the female life, that as Jenny says, compromise the life and the future of children. So for sure, with the results, we cannot draft any guidelines yet because the evidence is still low, but at least put in context the requirements or the requirements to take into account the periconceptional or the conceptional nutrition also for macronutrients, because usually it has been done for micronutrients, some vitamins and minerals, but not for macronutrients, you know. So this is for me important. Also, I have to say that since we are living in a Mediterranean country, and Mediterranean diet is a plant-based diet, high in fat. So the GI and GLO is not substantially high compared to other populations. Because, for example, we realized that in the UK Biobank, the GI was substantially higher than in our cohorts, and it makes sense. So probably if we analyze other populations, so also we have this difference. And also I didn't present for time constraints, but we conduct some sensitivity analysis for adjusting for ethnicity. Because although ethnicity was, I mean, most of women were Caucasian, more than, I think it was 83% of women were Caucasian, but we had some pregnant women from other ethnicities, so we tried to modulate somehow the same, and we didn't get significant results because probably the sample size, but also it could be important because the nutritional behaviors are totally different, and also the GI and GL were different, those women with other ethnicities. So yeah, the recommendations would be based on our studies, but for sure we need consistently demonstrated in other cohorts.